Okay. Hey, welcome to Coffee with Roscoe. This is episode 2. We're talking about wind energy taxes and whether or not we should raise them in Wyoming. This is the show where you get to learn about the levers of politics in Wyoming. Hey, Pops, how you doing?
Morning from Wyoming, Will. Good to see you. It's a busy week out here. We mostly the construction company was working on this 1906 restoration on the Barcross Ranch down in Cora, and we're just trying to get it ready by June 1st. The branding down there, but I did go over to Lander via Togedy, going to the northern end of the winds. It was stunningly beautiful. To the revenue committee meeting where we talked about uh, mainly vape products in schools. That was the big issue. Representative Albert Summers brought over some teachers and some principals and some resource officers from schools, and did a really great job of presenting that. We went over some old tax bills that didn't make it through the legislature that have some promise for Wyoming. And we talked about electrical generation and how to tax that as well. I came around the southern end of the winds, another stunningly beautiful drive, and made it to the task force on blockchain development in Wyoming and up in Jackson. It was extremely well received by the town, and there's some great intelligent conversation, people from all over the world. Looks like Wyoming is ahead of the game there. That was it for the week. How was your week?
That's good. Yeah, I'm on paternity leave, so I've been reading the Wyoming budget and taking care of Cal, who's 6 months old. And yeah, let's do a coffee cheers. We also have a good friend, Tate Nielsen. And hey, welcome to the show, Tate.
Hi, everybody. Honored to be on.
Yeah, Tate's gonna be our wind expert in the next part of the show. So let's get right into it. Um, yeah. Oh, first I wanted to shout out to uh, the presidential candidate that is planning to use PowerPoint at the State of the Union if he gets elected. This is Andrew Yang. He got a crowd shouting PowerPoint at one of his rallies, but it resonated with me as a millennial. But thought that was fun to see. Anyway, onto the real meat of the show. We are talking about, should Wyoming increase the taxes on wind energy in the state? I'm going to give just a quick update and summary on the current status of wind in Wyoming and why it's important. So right now, coal is about a quarter of the tax revenues for Wyoming, and these come from the severance taxes of the coal extracted from the ground, as well as the property taxes on the value of the minerals. And it's just a huge amount of money that Wyoming relies on. The problem is coal plants are being retired and they're not being built. And this is happening all across the U.S. Just in the last year, there were several plants closed in Texas, Ohio, Wisconsin, Florida, and a couple other states. And this is sort of in spite of the fact that President Trump is actually advocating for the use of coal. So, and the reasons I have heard this is happening is because actually the projects to build coal power plants aren't being funded by banks because there's so many risks for the projects, including them being held up in court for environmental reasons, as well as all the risks associated with just building power plants. And Wyoming has a lot of wind. It's actually ranked seventh in the amount of wind that's available to states, but it's only built out enough to rank it 15th in the amount of wind that's actually produced. So there is opportunity to build more wind projects and get tax revenue from those projects. So currently 86% of the electricity produced in Wyoming is by coal, but an increasing percent is by Wyoming. In 2000, we were only producing about a couple hundred megawatts megawatt hours of power from wind, and now it's almost 5,000 megawatt hours. Wind is currently taxed at $1 per megawatt hour, and if we compare that to coal, if we estimate the amount of taxes on a megawatt basis for coal, it's around 3 to 5 megawatt hours, dollars per megawatt hour. And right now, the revenues from taxes on the wind industry they're just a drop in the bucket. It's $1.6 million, which is less than 0.5% for the Wyoming budget. And compare that to coal, which is almost 25% of the Wyoming budget. So there is some interest in increasing the revenues from wind, and what we're going to talk about is does it make sense to increase the tax on wind, and would that increase revenues or sort of scare away business to the state? So I wanted to better introduce Tate, who I went to college with and has since spent 10 years in the wind industry. He has financed over $3 billion of renewable energy projects and has been part of developing wind projects in states including Texas, Utah, Maine, Vermont, Hawaii, Washington, New York, and notably missing is Wyoming, Tate.
Someday. Hope to someday.
Yeah, we hope so too. And I've played hockey with him, and don't play hockey with him unless you want your ankle's broken. He's a total goon. It's half serious. But welcome to the show, Tate.
Thanks, everybody. I'm very happy to be here with both the Roscoes.
So, we're trying to answer the question of should Wyoming increase its tax on wind, and I'd just like to understand from a business perspective of how does it work actually to make a wind project a reality? Can you walk us through the steps?
Sure. So again, Tate Nielsen, I work here in Boston for a company called Long Road Energy. And what we do is we develop wind projects, we build wind projects, and then we operate wind projects. So full cycle of a wind project. When we're looking at a map and we're determining where we want to spend our energy and our money, there's a few things that are most important. First is resource, like Will said. Wyoming's very high on the ladder of the resources assessment. Two is that resource needs to be used to create revenues, and that's the power price is the next aspect of what we look at. We need to make sure that there is a power price that can support the build. And then third is how much does it cost to build? Are we talking about a granite mountain in Maine? Are we talking about a plain in Wyoming, for instance, or the Midwest? There's a significant difference to how much it's going to cost up front to build that project. And then lastly, kind of aside from the economics, is how hard is it to permit in that area? Are we going to be spending 10 years working with local counties and towns and states and developing a permitting regime, or is it understood? Do we know what the rules are? We're happy to follow them, but we just want to understand that everyone knows what the rules are, and so permitting is important.
Okay, awesome. And right now, wind is taking advantage of the federal subsidies that come in the form of a tax credit. Is that correct? I just want to get a sense of where you think the wind industry is going as these tax credits disappear over the next year. Can you just share how those work?
Yep. So the wind industry historically has been subsidized through federal government, federal tax credits. Recently, those have come in either of two forms, either the production tax credit or the investment tax credit. When you build your wind farm, you get to choose either the investment tax credit, which is a 30% credit against the cost to build. that's now come down and will go away completely next year. The other is the production tax credit, which is a credit that you get for 10 years, and it's $1 per megawatt hour based credit for every megawatt hour that you create. Normally with wind projects, because of the number of megawatt hours that you're creating, it makes more sense to elect the production tax credit. Ever since 2016, that credit has been dropping by 20% a year. So in 2016, in today's dollars, that production tax credit's worth about $24. And today, if you were to start building wind project and complete that project, when you went into service, that credit would be worth 40% of that $24 for the next 10 years. If you start your project next year, there is no tax credit available to a wind project.
Huh. And so without these subsidies, where do you see the wind industry going? This is a federal agency, the EIA. They see the wind industry sort of flatlining after these tax credits disappear. As someone in the business, where do you see this going?
Sure. I mean, the credits were there to incentivize the build out of a business, and they succeeded in building out a very significant wind business throughout the United States. Those credits are no longer necessary. Are they valuable? Do we like them? Yes, but they're no longer necessary to compete with coal, natural gas, solar, the nuclear, the other types of generation on the grid. The cost of wind build upfront has come down significantly. The amount of megawatt hours each wind turbine captures has gone up significantly, so that the average cost of wind powered generation has come down to a point where it is competitive, and it's not competitive everywhere. It's still very costly to build in Hawaii, and even though they have much higher power prices, so it's not competitive everywhere, but it is competitive in a lot of markets, a lot of important markets, and it should be able to stand on its own. The other benefit of completely removing tax benefits is we don't have to deal with monetizing those benefits. It's a very complicated process that involves a lot of investment banks, and they end up actually receiving a lot of the profit from the development of wind projects. Here, we no longer need to send money to New York City banks, and that money can stay in the pockets of those people that develop the wind farms themselves.
Interesting. So, this tax credit has been around for, I don't know, a decade or 2 decades. And before this subsidy, wind was not competitive. Can you explain how it has become competitive? Where have those cost savings sort of been realized?
Sure. The size of the turbines has increased significantly. You can kind of see it where you are, Will. If you kind of drive through Northern California or the Palm Desert, you'll see the evolution of wind turbines from the lattice structures with the quickly spinning wind turbines up top to what now we have multi-gigawatt machines that are capturing. They have 110 meter blades.
Oh, wow.
Huge wind capture. And what that does is, the cost of installing one of those is on a per megawatt basis much, much, much lower than it used to be. It's probably, over the last 10 years, it's come down by at least half. And since the 90s, when that credit was first developed, it's come down probably fivefold.
Yeah, it seems like if this subsidy actually does sunset and it is no longer a subsidy, it'll be a huge success story that a subsidy helped kickstart an industry that can now stand on its feet.
Absolutely, that was the intent, and you're seeing the same thing with solar right now too. I know we're not talking about solar right now, but you're going to see solar build-outs in Wyoming.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do an episode on that. And that's near and dear to my heart. But trying to better understand the issue of should Wyoming raise taxes. What what is the impact of a $1 per megawatt hour tax versus a $5 per megawatt hour tax when considering building out a project in Wyoming?
Sure. So just super high level power prices that a wind project would receive in a place like Wyoming are approximately $20 a megawatt hour. Maybe a little lower, maybe a little higher, but call it $20 a megawatt hour. So that $1 per megawatt hour tax is about 5% of our revenue, which seems kind of fairly in line with what you're seeing on the oil and gas side. If you were to increase that to $4 or $5, you're talking about a 25% tax on our revenues. That's significant. We can't build a project and somehow eat the cost of a $5 per megawatt hour tax. What we could do is we could build that project and sell power for $5 a megawatt hour more. But who's paying that? It's the customer in the end. It's a utility customer. So if you want to incentivize wind build out, that type of activity, a 25% tax is absolutely the wrong way to go about it. We're happy to pay taxes. We're happy to pay our fair share. We pay taxes in all sorts of different ways. We pay taxes, property taxes. We pay income taxes. We pay lots of people who pay income taxes and property taxes. But direct tax on our generation is something you don't see in other states.
And then just trying to understand the mechanics of the tax a little bit is in other states, is it always a tax on a dollar per megawatt hour basis, or is it are there other sort of easier ways to tax wind?
Yeah, very rare you see a dollar per megawatt hour tax. Normally you see, if there is a tax on wind, it's a tax on revenues. And it's a similar tax. It's not a wind specific tax, but it's kind of a excise business type tax on your income. And we're happy to pay the same income tax as other industries. As long as it's known and it doesn't change over time, and we're investing a lot of money into a project and into development, and to have that change over time really scares investors away. But so it's either a percentage of revenue, or a lot of ways, times it's done through property taxes. And that's more at the county or town level.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it did. From the Wyoming revenues, it looked like a large percentage of the taxes actually go to local governments, even more than to the state. Hey Jim, jump in here. What are some other concerns that you've heard in the legislature or from people in Wyoming?
Well, just last week at the Revenue Committee, there was a few public comments about did wind pay their fair share of reclamation if a field, there's a change in technology and the field is no longer viable? Is there a bond for that, such as coal has to pay? Is there what are they doing about the Migratory Bird Act? Are they in compliance with that? And the third one might be, I can't.
Oh yeah, there's not enough open space in Wyoming to film Western movies anymore because there's always this visual pollution by the turbines.
I'm pretty sure the movie producers can just cut those turbines out.
We have plenty of open
Look good in the background, the new cowboy.
They just wear a bigger hat. That'll be all right.
Yeah, Tate, have you got those questions before? How does that work?
We see it everywhere else in the country. People have the same concerns, and we've dealt with it in various ways. The reclamation issue is, it's well understood. There's a lot of engineering companies that kind of study how much it's going to cost to take these down at the end of their life and scrap the metal and the fiberglass and spread new seed over top the foundations. we do provide reclamation bonds in a lot of our counties or the states that we work in. Not everyone requires it, but a lot of them do, and we're happy to do that. It's not always, these are 30-year at least investments that we're making. So we really do see these things operating. I mean, they should last much longer than 30 years, but kind of the investment horizon that we look at is 30 years. And oftentimes you'll see that reclamation bond required kind of after year 10 or after year 20, so kind of closer to the 30 years, so that you know a little bit better what those costs are going to be. But sometimes there's an initial reclamation bond, and then it changes. There's restudied at year 10 or year 20 to make sure that we do indeed have enough funds at the end. On the bird question, or migratory animals or bats, we've seen every flavor of animal in places that we've developed, endangered and not. And the wind industry has been around for a long time. And yes, there were problems when it was first developed. And yes, maybe there were takes of species that we didn't intend to take. But the biologists and the developers and everyone have really worked together very well, I think, to make sure that we develop in the right places. So if we're in the middle of a migratory bird path, we're not gonna build there. And we are required to do that study before we put anything in the ground. We're not allowed to build upwards unless we know exactly what's flying through there, or what's stampeding through there, or slithering through there. And we do extensive studies. If we're kind of on the fringes of where those species might exist, there are things that we can do with our wind farm to make sure that we don't harm any of those animals. Sometimes it's curtailing in certain periods of the year during certain hours of the day, to make sure that we can allow those animals through safely.
So, I mean, wind turbines do kill birds. I think there's no way to sort of deny that. Do you ever lose sleep worrying that the country will just become super bleeding heart and hold you personally responsible for all the birds your projects have killed?
So they are allowed to. Honestly, the federal government has, over endangered species specifically, the ability to hold projects and potentially individuals accountable if those projects do take endangered species. Projects have taken endangered species, and the feds have stepped in. We've seen it, and we've developed exhaustive programs to make sure that, one, it doesn't happen again, and two, usually there's a habitat conservation program that goes along with that. So they're encouraging, maybe not right next to your wind turbines, but down the street, that species to breed and be successful elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds like you've thought about this a lot more than I have. It's interesting. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I think one other question was, when the wind stops blowing, what happens to the power grid, and are we going to run out of power? Which is fairly obvious answer. If you could touch on that, and maybe just some benefits that these large wind projects, which is we have one south of Rollins, very big, and it's been underway for quite a while, and I think they may be affected by this. They're worried about this, an increase in tax as well.
Sure. Sorry, one was what was the first question, Jim, again? I totally blanked on that. The grid. Yes, the grid.
Thank you.
There are professionals whose job it is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to monitor the grid and make sure that there is an equal amount of generation to the load. The load changes daily based on weather patterns, based on people coming and going, all sorts of reasons. It's fairly understandable why the load could go up or go down. So they plan for it, and they plan for it on a second by second and year by year basis. So one, we have a fairly good understanding of, maybe not a month ahead of time, but a day ahead of time or an hour ahead of time if it's going to be windy or it's not going to be windy. And if it is windy, approximately how much wind we'll be producing. And we provide that information to the grid operator. And they monitor that. And if the wind starts to slow down or shut off completely, they're able to turn up a different resource. Usually that's a natural gas plant. And they can do that with the flick of a switch. And they say, turn on natural gas or turn up a little bit or turn back down. And it allows the grid to be in parity and everyone's lights to continue to stay on.
So is it fair to assume that as the sort of as wind becomes more of a percentage of the electricity produced, that more natural gas plants would need to be available, or does coal power plant provide the same sort of peaking load that natural gas does?
Coal does not. Natural gas does. Hydroelectric power can. Pump storage can. There are all sorts of varieties of storage available out there that will continue to be built where there is significant renewable penetration. You see that in states where there is that already. In Hawaii and California is becoming that way. Even Texas is starting to see storage, Arizona, and it's cost competitive. And oftentimes the storage is actually cheaper than building that new natural gas plant. You can build it in sizes that range from very small to very large, and you can put them in places that you might not be able to permit a natural gas plant. So there's all sorts of ways to make sure the grid maintains its reliability, and that's first and foremost. No wind project is going to be allowed onto the grid if the utility deems it unreliable.
Right, because you essentially sell your power to the utility.
That's right.
Okay, so we're coming down on the end of the show here, and the goal of this show was to try to answer the question of should Wyoming increase its tax on wind energy, and if I can just try to summarize what we've learned, which is the current tax of $1 per megawatt hour is roughly the same as the severance tax on coal and natural gas, which is it's about 5%. I know coal is taxed at 7%. I'm not sure what natural gas is, but a tax of $5 per megawatt hour is roughly a tax of 25%, which would result in either higher electricity prices for Wyoming residents, or wind companies would just choose not to build in the state.
That's right.
Go ahead. Were you going to say
That's
that?
right. They're just
Okay.
confirming.
And it also seems like this consistent threat of raising taxes, which is sort of the opposite of what Wyoming is known for, creates this risk of whiplash for developers that would make them hesitate to bring the business to Wyoming. Is that fair?
Absolutely. We need certainty in any business environment. We can be regulated, that's fine, and taxed, that's fine at a reasonable level, but we just need to know what it is.
Right.
These are long-term investments. We're talking about 30 years here. The development cycles, multiples of years, significant amounts of investment, and we need to know how.
And then it also sounds like there's opportunity to improve the tax by, instead of making it $1 per megawatt hour, to make it based on the actual income, or make it similar to the severance taxes of coal, where it's actually based on the value rather than the production. And then also, since there are concerns about bonding, Jim, you could confirm or propose legislation to make sure that wind companies do have some sort of bonding for the environmental impact of the wind fields after they're done.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it's just another energy industry that seems like it's playing by the same rules, and would like to do the same. They would like to have a level playing field and a constant playing field that goes out for a length of time so they can make their business decisions on that. Without putting it just a plug in for wind industry, the benefits of it, maybe Tate could just briefly touch on those that would why it would help Wyoming.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, what we see in states and counties and in towns where we go, there's the very direct impact of jobs, of course, and construction jobs are the first thing you'll see. For the construction period, it's a year to 2 years, depending on the size, and significant numbers. If it's a large scale wind project, you're peaking at 200, 300 people on site for a wind project. On average, over the course of the project, maybe 50 or 60 people. And these are well-paying construction jobs. These are heavy civil, technical, electricians, those types of jobs. So you see that. You also see property taxes, and that's normally at the county level. And we pay property taxes just like anyone else does, and we're happy to support schools and hospitals and roads and all of that. And on top of that, we create kind of second level jobs. So maybe they're not involved directly on site, but we have lawyers and we have consultants and there's engineers and there's all sorts of other industries or people that we support through our development efforts and operations.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Well, what else? What other slides do I have? Okay, our coffee is almost done here, and the next episode we're going to be talking about the opportunities of the new blockchain legislation that Wyoming has passed, and the goal is to take all that legalese that's written into the bills that the legislature passed and break it down into very practical terms of, if you're a business, what do these laws allow you to do, or what do these laws protect you from? So I think we haven't confirmed, but we'll have a great expert on that as well. But that's our show today. And if you would like to get an email every Thursday morning with the new episode and have coffee with us, please go to coffeewithroscoe.com and enter your email, and we'll send it to you. Hey, Tate, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Great to talk with you, and I hope you do come build some wind in Wyoming.
I hope so, too. It's been a pleasure. Representative Roscoe, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Tate. It's great to see you again. You're welcome anytime out here, and we'll take care of my grandkids for me.
Yeah, I will. All right, thanks guys. Bye.